Well, hello, my name is Laurie Smith, and this is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, the continuation. It's just a video that I like to do just to help support, be a bit of encouragement for adult survivors of child abuse. So you have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about the topic of child abuse, which is, you know, not a fun topic. And it can be disturbing for people, who are, are maybe sensitive to the topics of violence and abuse. So you have to, know it's good for you to listen to, and it's adult material. It's not for younger children, so it's for adults, and it's a topic that most people find very disturbing. So if you are sensitive to the topics of violence or abuse, things like that, and or you're a survivor of abuse, just starting your healing journey, you want to do a safety check. Make sure you're safe enough to be listening. If this is something that might bother you, you just change the channel. You wouldn't be hurting my feelings. And because the topics, like I said, are very disturbing topics of abuse. So, and especially first thing in the morning. So do a safety check. Make sure you're safe enough to be listening. Just say, am I feeling strong enough to listen? Is this going to send me backward in my healing journey? If you're a survivor of abuse, and because you don't want to have a miserable day, and then hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. And you have to be careful watching stuff like this if you're a survivor just starting your healing journey. And anything like this to do with abuse, because it can trigger memories, and then you don't want to have a horrible day. So just make that decision for yourself, and whether you should be listening. And if not, you can always come watch it again if you wanted to at another date, or just we're looking at the Survivor to Thriver manual workbook, and that's from the ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse. It's a Morris Center program, and it's free to use. You can download it. You can read it from their site as a page. And if you want a hard copy, you can actually buy one of those. But they charge for that because they have to have it printed and collated and all of that. So they charge like a small fee. So hello, Pastor Alibello. How are you? Good evening to you. And hi, Wanda. Good morning to you. And I'm glad you're here. I hope you're okay, and I hope your day is going good so far. And mine's getting started, so we'll see how it goes. It's Friday, so I love Fridays. It doesn't matter what's going on. I just love Fridays, so it's a good day. So we'll get started. We left off looking at step 4 in the Survivor to Thriver workbook on page 75. And that's a really rough one. I really took some time going through that yesterday. But I shall re-experience each set of memories of the abuse as they surface in my mind. It really sounds easier said than done. It's really hard work for people who have survived abuse to do that, to go back in and re-experience the memories as they come. And they really talked about, what you can do, to try to help yourself to get a hold of memories, right? And that's what what the purpose of this is, getting a hold of those memories and then allowing ourselves to feel the feelings, write, journal it, draw pictures, write letters to your abusers, all this sort of stuff. And it's helpful because it helps us to process our feelings and how it made us feel as children, how it's affected our lives as adults, all this stuff. But it is difficult work. As they said, like, this is probably the hardest step there is, step 4. And it's the one that takes the longest. So we were looking at that yesterday, and we're going to pick up with the self-help section of that step. And the self-help section starts on page 76. And they said, number 1, record in your journal each episode of abuse that you recount in ASCA meetings or in your therapy. Describe your story in your own words or in the way you have heard other survivors share their stories. Just be sure that the experiences you recount are yours and not someone else's. Draw pictures to accompany the words and to create a full image of the surroundings. Include as much detail and emotional expression as you feel comfortable with. Writing and drawing in story form is helpful in organizing and integrating the past experience for you in a different manner, one that takes into account your adult perspective and knowledge. Try to sort out exactly what happened and your reactions then as well as now. So your goal is to develop a more complete understanding of the abuse episodes, one that incorporates the roles played by your parents, your abusers, your family, and the forces over which you had no control. So that's really delving into it. And I mean, I did all that. It's, of course, writing my books and speaking publicly about this stuff. When I first started writing that A Life of Death to Redemption, it was a blog. And I started just writing a daily blog, or I'd write pretty much an entry every day. And, it was just the beginning of me sorting out what was going on in my mind and how the abuse had affected me. But I was writing it as a story based from my eyes from about 13. That's where the story starts. So, and it's a true story, all of it. But I started at that point because that's where it seemed sort of fitting for me to start to explain the abuse and what was going on in my life. And, it's really hard to do that stuff. Like I said, it's not easy. It was difficult. But once I started to actually share that stuff, it took a load off me because I was no longer carrying that burden, that was killing me, that silent burden of all of this torment and trauma that had really affected me and caused me a lot of problems in my adult life, as well as in my childhood, obviously, right? Being abused, it's horrific. So these things are hard to do. Like they say, have a support system around you. You know, if you don't have a support system around you, you've got to find at least one or two trustworthy people that really are safe people. That are not going to hurt you. They're not going to take advantage of you. They're not going to take your information and use it against you, sort of thing. It's you need some healthy, safe people around you. And there are people out there like that, but you have to look until you find them. And make sure that they are safe and they're not going to hurt you somehow any further than you've already been wounded. Right? So this is the issue. And that's why I trust support groups like the ASCA, exactly. Because that's where there's safety in that group. And that's really important for survivors of abuse. And number 2 in the self-help section, you really need to take good care of yourself while working this step because re-experiencing your memories can be very exhausting. Try to incorporate exercise, plenty of sleep, stress management techniques, meditation, maybe even some high-dose vitamin therapy in your daily routine. All of these things can help your body and spirit stay healthy and vigorous while you work through your memories. And I mean, some people may, not need as much, self-care going through this stuff, and then others would need a lot. Some people are in therapy while they're doing this work, and like the ASCA, many people that attend the ASCA, it's a peer-to-peer support group, are in therapy, and their therapists or counselors will suggest that they actually join a peer-to-peer group, at some point. And some people just may not experience, so much hardship looking back at the abuse, right? Everybody's different. We all are different people. We've been through different things, and we all handle things differently, right? So it's kind of like whatever you need, what works for you. That's what's important. Because that's what I did. There were certain things that just don't work for me, that worked for others. Certain things work for me, but don't work for others. It's kind of whatever you need, and as a survivor of abuse, to help you get through this stuff, right? So it is important to take care of yourself. That's what I'm learning how to do, because I never really took very good care of myself, or I wasn't taken care of as a child, and then repeated that pattern through my adult life. And I'm still working on trying to learn how to take care of myself, and that I should take care of myself. It's kind of like, oh, I should take care of myself. Okay, how am I going to do this? Oh, I have to, it's hard. It's hard work if you didn't learn that. Right? I have to learn how to do it. I'm trying to force myself to take care of myself. Number 3, if you tire of writing, try tape recording your memories and listening to them a few weeks later. You may choose or not to add new segments at the end of the tape. That's it, like back in the old days with tape recorders. But nowadays it's like, you can just record someplace, on your phone or wherever. You have to be careful with that because if you don't want somebody to get a hold of that information, then you'd have to make sure that you kept it very private. And then, if you didn't want somebody to get it and use it against you, be really careful with stuff like that. Me, I went public with my stuff. I'm like, I'm going public, but not everyone wants to do that. Some people, their lives would be in danger if they actually told about the abuse. Their abusers are still alive and would possibly hurt them or, try to kill them if they went public with their stuff. And a lot of times that's the case. So you have to be really careful doing stuff like that. And you can actually be, if you're writing and you have an issue where your life would be threatened if anybody found out about the abuse sort of thing, you'd have to make sure you tore up and destroyed the material to make sure that, you have to get yourself to safety. I know actually I've met survivors who were in that situation where the abuser was still living and they were concerned for their lives if anybody had found out about the abuse. Right? And this is just horrific. But we know it's going on. It does happen. It's It's happening right now. Right? So I just wish that, I hope that's not the situation for you, whoever's listening to this, and all my friends in the chat room. And so then they said, listening again to these tapes several months later may be especially eye-opening because it may both confirm your progress in remembering and trigger new memories. These are just ways, just ideas for people, how to get in touch with the abuse, but it is very hard to do. Like I said, it's difficult because it's so disturbing. Of course, abuse is disturbing no matter how you look at it. And survivors of abuse have already been wounded, so that's what I'm saying. Many would be like, I don't want to revisit that abuse, and who can blame you? Like nobody. It's kind of like, but I know for myself, until I actually reached out and got help, nothing. It wasn't going to get better. It was going to continue to spiral downward. So that's why I was at the point where I had to get help. But you know, like I said, we're all in different places in our healing journey. Maybe some haven't even started, and it's clearly up to you to make that decision. Whatever the best decision is for yourself at the time, you need to make the best decision for yourself, kind of become your own best advocate. Because, maybe you're not ready to start a healing journey. You're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm not really ready for that. Well, only you would know that. Right? And only you would know if you're ready to start a healing journey. So keep that in mind. Don't let anybody push you to do anything. Number 4, what about that group you were going to join? By step 4, a support group may prove to be an invaluable source of support and encouragement for your efforts. Recovery is usually faster and safer if you don't do it alone. You need people more than you might think. That's interesting. I know I did, and I'm glad I reached out because I certainly was going down to my own destruction, and I'm so happy I got help. That's why I'm on here doing this stuff, because I'm really just want to be a voice of encouragement for people to not allow yourself to be destroyed by this. It's not okay. Professional help for this section is number 1. In your work with your therapist, explore your reactions to talking about the abuse. How do you find yourself expecting your therapist to react? How do you feel after disclosing, especially personal segments of your story? Do you feel less ashamed of what happened now that you've shared it with someone else? Are you able to talk more easily with other people about your abuse and your work in recovery? And number 2, remember again that you have the right to control the pace of your therapy. At times, you and your therapist may disagree on the best pace for your particular stage of recovery. At times, you may want to go faster, while he or she thinks you should slow down. And other times, he or she, your therapist, may want to push you to deal with something if they think it would benefit you. Ultimately, you must take an active role in setting the pace of your recovery, settling on one that is comfortable but not stagnant. And for yourself, like I said, you're the only one who can be the judge of that. And you're the only one that can make that decision, how you're progressing. Your therapist might suggest something, but you do have the right then to tell them that you need to slow down or tell them that you need to speed it up a little bit, because it's truly your life, right? We need to be in control of our life. As children, you can't control your life. That's just the obvious issue. Children have no control over what's happening to them. But as an adult, we do. And we have rights. And we have the ability to stand up for ourselves. And we have the ability to make these decisions for ourselves. You know what I mean? So we need to do that. We need to start stepping up to the plate and saying, look, I'm the adult in the situation. I need to know what's best for me. And really sit down and think about it. What's best for me? You know what I mean? I actually write lists. People would be like, that's a little odd, but I do. When I come to a sort of situation where I'm looking at doing something, but I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, I'll literally write on scrap paper. I'll just get a piece of scrap paper. I keep it around because I'm looking at it. But I write down the pros and cons of, what the issue is. How do I need to approach it? What's going to be the pros? What's going to be the cons? Is this a good time to do this sort of thing? And I do that stuff all the time because I'm trying to get in touch with how I'm feeling. You know what I mean? I don't, and that gives me a perspective on what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And so it's good for a person to do that because then so it sort of solidifies what you really need. Because you take a look at that list and you're like, there's the pros, there's the cons. There's a lot more pros to the cons. The pros are more meaningful than the cons. Or you could say, no, there's a lot more cons. I think I'm going to hold off. You know what I mean? So it just depends on your list, right? But I do this stuff quite often, actually, help me make a decision on which direction I want to go or what's going on, something I'm working on in my life. And it's very helpful for me. So that's the end of that step. That's a rough step, I'm telling you. It is, because I know, because I did it. And it was hard to do. And like I said, I'm sitting here today, so many years later, in a lot better place. But at the time when I was going through this stuff, it was very, very difficult. I wasn't on my own. My husband was very supportive, like I said. He wasn't abused as a child, so he couldn't really help me in that department, but he was just a really good support person. Whatever I needed, he was there. He was cool with it. You know what I mean? It was like that was awesome. Not everybody has that. Um, he supported everything I did when I was doing the blog talk radio shows. He just completely supported everything I did. He just, you know, he was just like, I'm so happy for you, because he knew he could see the difference in my life and how much better I was getting as each year rolled on, and how much more I was starting to enjoy life. And you know, not everybody has that. See, so that's why you got to find a good friend then, somebody who's going to support your recovery from anything, somebody who's going to stand by you through the hard stuff when you're not so lovable. And someone who's just going to understand that you've suffered in your lifetime and you don't need more suffering. You need support, right? And so, a good friend, right? Everybody needs a good friend. Step 5, this is the next one up. This is a tough one too. It really is for many people. I accept that I was powerless over my abuser's actions, which holds them responsible. And that's page 77. And like, this is the steps that you would go, like we do in our ASCA meetings. There's 2 different types of meetings. One's like an open tag share meeting. Everybody shares just open, whatever they want to share. It's not a step meeting. And then there's a step meeting, which is these steps. And whatever step we're on, that's the step we're working on. And so we go, this is what we do at these meetings. And each time you go around, you learn a little bit more, you come a little further, made a little bit more progress, hopefully, or sometimes falling backward. And that's where it's important to go to those meetings, because then you can get that support from people, to know that sometimes we do go back in our healing journey a bit, because something will set us back and all of a sudden we're down again, and we're having a rough time dealing with something, and whatever the issue is. And that's why those groups are really important. We don't always necessarily make a lot of progress. Sometimes, like I said, it's sort of take years to go. They even say it takes years to go through this stuff. It's not something that happens overnight, unfortunately, because otherwise we could just snap our fingers and we'd be better and we'd be like, yay, this is great. That's not reality, unfortunately, because that's what I was hoping. Step 5, I accept that I was powerless over my abuser's actions, which holds them responsible. Page 77. By now, you know that survivors grow up believing the classic myth of child abuse, that they, not their parents or abusers, were somehow responsible for the abuse. That's just sad, but so true. Many, many, many survivors believe that it's their fault, that they did something to cause that. And that's just not true. They said the justifications for this myth are as varied as your imagination is fertile. For instance, quote unquote, I let him do it to me, right? I should have been able to protect myself. These are the things that survivors might say to themselves or somebody else. Some people say I liked certain aspects of the abuse, the attention, the gifts, the sense of being special. That can happen in a situation, especially when there's a CSA child sexual abuse going on and the victim was groomed, and a lot of times that's the case. In my case, I wasn't groomed, so it was just violent sexual assault. But the thing is many times children are groomed and they're given gifts and made to feel really special, and the abuser will bond with them in that way. And that way the child who doesn't know any better is being groomed to be a victim of child sexual abuse. The child's often distorted perceptions of who was responsible are enhanced by the parents' abusers' indictments. For instance, I'm beating you because you are a bad boy. I'm showing you how much I love you. I wouldn't be calling you stupid if you showed me you have more than half a brain in that head of yours. These are things that somebody might say to a child, right? An abuser. Or you have the devil inside you and I'm going to beat it out of you. Just terrible. These are just examples for people to get a hold of something that maybe happened to them, that they'll be like, oh yeah, that's abuse, These words are truly toxic because they do more than simply and unjustly place the blame for the abuse on your shoulders. And they eat away at your positive sense of self and the lingering messages continue to do so in your adult life. And that's just true. That's the truth of it for me. You know, all of those, all of the abuse that my parents, because my parents were my abusers, inflicted on me had a huge impact on my life. And, you know, because of the things that they said to me while they were beating on me or mistreating me, you know, that stuff sinks in, especially if it's a repeated, obviously abuse is a repeated event. So it's something that the abuser is going to do to keep, you know, that's just how they're going to treat that child, right? So, you know, all of that stuff had a profound effect on my life. And even as a child, it certainly did. But I'm talking even years later, I could still hear those tapes playing around in my head of all the stuff that my abusers told me. And this is horrific, right? It's just absolutely, but I don't take any responsibility for it. That's kind of where I differ from a lot of people because my parents were abusing my siblings long before I was born. And then when I was born, I could see the abuse going on and I knew it wasn't just me. So when my parents would say, you know, something was my fault, I was causing the issue. That's why they had to treat me so harshly. I knew that that was false because they were already abusing all the other children too. And I was like, I'm not taking responsibility for this, you know? And I didn't. And the CSA child sexual abuse, I didn't take responsibility for. So I didn't take on that guilt. I did take on some shame because of what it did, how it made me feel. And, you know, just the damage from all of that abuse. Just horrific. So I did take on some shame, but I didn't take on any guilt. I knew it wasn't my fault, and the blame went where it went. It was my abuser's guilt. It was their fault, right? So I didn't have a guilt problem, but I know some people do. And they said you can challenge these words of your parents' abusers, whoever they were, that continue to echo in your mind by coming to understand your dysfunctional family or the situation you were in. They say dysfunctional family, but not all abuse is within the family, right? So they're kind of just throwing that in there, but you know, not everybody was abused by a family member. And recognizing the real reasons why you were abused. This is an essential step in recovery because without seeing that your parents or abusers, you know, whoever they were at fault, you will have difficulty in facing the remaining tasks of recovery, directing your anger away from yourself and towards them, uncovering your shame and understanding how the abuse affects your life today. And most importantly, you need to understand that you were the child and that you had neither the power nor the authority to make your parents' abusers do anything to you. The abuse was their responsibility because, quite simply, they had the greater power and they did it to you. And nothing you could have done would have changed this because families and society are set up to give power and authority to parents and adults in general. But children have little or no power over their abuse or much of anything else. And that's a fact. I mean, children are not responsible for this. They're just not. There's no possible way. If you're listening to this and you're a survivor of abuse and somehow you've taken on the guilt or they made you feel guilty for any of the abuse, whatever it was, whoever the abuser was, there's no possible way that you could be, that it could be your fault. No, there's just no way. It's not our fault. The blame should go where it should go, and that's to the abuser. The abuser of the situation. And sometimes people are even abused by adolescents and by other children, right? Which can happen. I mean, it happens more than people know. I actually know a lot of survivors. That's why I know all this stuff, because not just reading the headlines, I just know a lot of survivors. I would never mention names though. But the thing is many survivors are abused by an older sibling or a sibling or another youth in, you know, it's not necessarily a family member. So children can also abuse other children, but it's usually it's that's a small percentage of the abuse actually. It's more common than people think. Some people think that would never happen, but it actually does. But the thing is it's more the adults in the situation that are abusing children. That's the majority, and it's not always a parent. You know, it could be a teacher, it could be a coach, could be a clergy, somebody in the church, could be somebody from camp. You know, this sort of stuff. It's not always a parent, right? So whoever the abuser is, it's their fault, not yours. Just remember that. It doesn't matter who the abuser was, their fault, not yours. You could not have done anything to stop it. You could not have done anything to protect yourself. You could not have done anything differently because children are vulnerable. So just so you know that, right? Children are completely at the mercy, really, of who's looking after them or who's in the situation. And they can't control that situation. And as a child, I mean, we want to, as an adult survivor of abuse, I want to be able to go back and say, you know, how could I have let that happen to me? That's actually never entered my mind. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it. You know what I mean? And there's no behavior that warrants abuse. Just like I said, especially if it's something to do with physical abuse, there's no like abuse is not discipline, and discipline is not abuse. Two different things. And as far as child sexual abuse, that is so incredibly wrong. You can't even begin to justify it. There are groups out there that are trying to get the government to allow adults to have sex with children whenever they want to. And they have their names on the roster. They know who they are. They know who these people are. They lobby the government in the United States every year. I don't think Canada, I don't think they're doing that. But in the States, they are. And it's just wrong. It's so wrong. It's just not okay. And, this is not a child abuse prevention show. So I'm talking about adult survivor issues. All I'm saying is that I never did anything to deserve that abuse, and neither did you. Just so you know, it's not your fault. And the guilty party is the abuser. Absolutely. So they said here, next up, um, besides recognizing the reality of who was responsible for the abuse, think about the following realities as well. As a child, you were not psychologically equipped to believe that what your parents or abusers were doing was wrong, much less speak out about it. Because you were dependent on them for so much, you couldn't risk alienating them by speaking the truth. Even if your child mind was precocious enough to make sense of the complex web of issues that comprises child abuse, few, if any, children can do this effectively because their intellectual capacities are not sufficiently developed to do so. You desperately wanted to love them and be loved by them. That's if it's a family situation, usually. It would have been foolish for you to incur their wrath and dash whatever hope of love, caring, and nurturing you labored or harbored inside. Think back to what it would have meant for you, the child, to accept that the people who were supposed to love you were actually hurting you. It's not surprising that few children can face this horrible reality, because to do so would cause them to become emotional orphans in the process, and little could be worse than that. And that's just the issue. That's something that, that's a huge issue for people, especially if the abusers are the parents or one of the parents, right? Because there's also love there. Like, that's what hurt. That's why it hurts. You know what I'm saying? And for me, when I was little, I loved my parents, even though there was I grew up in trauma and drama and chaos and crisis and abuse. But the thing is I still loved my parents. And the reason I know that is because I felt sorry for them. So that was how I kind of knew that I had feelings for them. Like, I always felt sorry for my mom because she was always crying, sitting around crying, usually at the kitchen table, after fighting with my dad. And he was quite often like slapping her around and attacking her. And he was always trying to rape her is what the issue was. And, I felt sorry for her. I was just a little kid. I didn't want to see my mom suffering, right? And so of course I loved my mom. And my dad, I didn't have as much a relationship with my dad, but I still loved him. And because when he would go out and try to kill himself, I always felt really bad for him. Even as a little kid, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, just knowing that my dad's out there trying to kill himself, it used to make me sad. And I was just a little kid, you know what I mean? But the abuse was so horrific, like the stuff that they were dishing out on me, especially. I was so small. Like, I was just so tiny as a kid because I came in as a preemie. And now I'm not tiny. I'm not small at all. I'm actually really big. But I'm actually quite tall and actually a large woman. So that's why nobody would really want to mess with me. But the thing is, I was very small as a kid. I was a tiny little kid. And I grew up, I was always kind of on the thin side and very, very small. And so the abuse was just horrific on my body. It was absolutely unbelievable what my parents would do. And then the CSA child sexual abuse from 8 to 9. Unbelievable that they would do this stuff to me. I was just this tiny little girl. And the thing is I wanted love. I needed care. I needed love. And there wasn't any there for me. So that I started to shut down. And I did talk about that in my books. Like, I really felt I felt that they had killed my soul, they killed my spirit, and I started to kind of shut down um, because of all that abuse, the physical abuse, the verbal, emotional abuse, all of it. Then the child sexual abuse. By the time I was 10, I was dead, literally. I felt dead. I wanted to be dead. Um, it's so horrific what children are put through, right? But I did before that, when I was a younger child, love my parents, but they taught me how to hate them by abusing me. So hate came on after that, and then I felt that I really hated my abusers, my parents, and that's the only way I could survive in that was to really just to kind of shut down and because as much when I loved them, it hurt too much. So then hatred came in. They basically were turning me into themselves, is what they were doing. Like my mom was turning me into her, full of hatred, and that's awful, but that's what people do. It's quite often, and it's usually not both parents, but sometimes it is. In my case, it was. So when I was a teenager, I thought I hated them all the way through my teens, and then I realized later, like a young adult, that I actually really more felt sorry for them you know, because they were so sick and twisted. And I thought, you ruined your whole life with your children. You could have this wonderful relationship with your children, all of these 7 children that they had. And instead of that, they they ruined it. You know, they destroyed it. They destroyed our family. So it was so harsh. And then I realized as an adult, I didn't really hate them. I just that's the only way I could survive was to turn off the love. Because I used to love my parents, and so this can happen, especially when it's a family situation. That's why I think my sister cannot, like she's DID and she's in denial about the abuse and about what went on in her family, and the issue is it's because she can't separate that out, because if she says she loves them, how could she love them if they hurt us like that? See what I mean? And that's why many survivors of abuse will always kind of have difficulty with this in this area of blaming the abuser because they can't blame them and at the same time love them. I've actually learned how to do that. My parents were responsible for the abuse. My brother raped me. He's responsible for the child sexual abuse. Um, it was wrong what they did. And do I love them? Yes, I do. But I will never, ever, ever be okay with what they did to me. It's just not okay. I can't excuse my parents' behavior and say, well, they just had so many problems. So that's why they tried to kill me several times. And rearrange my face and hurt me extremely badly. And, my brother was just mentally ill on drugs. That's why he raped me. So I have to just, he's a good guy. He's not a good guy. He's dead now. I mean, he committed suicide, but all of my abusers are gone. But the thing is they weren't good. They weren't good to me. They weren't good to each other. They weren't good to anybody in the family. Now they had friends that they were really good to. They had neighbors they were good to, but they weren't good to their family. So I'm able to separate this out, but my sister's not able to. And that's why, hi Tessa, how are you? I hope your day's going good so far. Good morning. It's morning here too. 9:00, 9:30. But this is a huge issue for survivors of abuse, especially if it was somebody in the family, like I'm saying. If it was an outside issue, it's a little different because, if it's somebody like, who got a hold of you at somehow outside of the family who was an abuser, that's a little different. And this section almost doesn't apply to you. It's not like a coach situation. Well, it might be because that's a trusted person that, a child might trust and put trust in a teacher or a coach or somebody else, like a neighbor or clergy or something, and then that trust is broken. There may have been a little bit of kind of this feeling of love. I love that person, especially children, because children start out, they are selfish because they can't help it. They need to learn to share and they need to learn, how to behave properly and stuff. You don't have to abuse them. You can teach them and bring them up properly, right? And thank you, Wanda. I appreciate that. And yeah, this is the thing. It's so hard, right? Children are actually full of love, and if they're brought up properly, it allows that love to to become this healthy love, that people will have later in life as adults. But you know, when that trust and that love is broken, it's very, very difficult. So for my sister, she likes to just remember the good stuff. And she's DID, so that's her way of coping, and that's okay. I'm not blaming her, or thinking that how she's handling is wrong. You know what I mean? She thinks what I'm doing is kind of wrong because she's like, she loved our parents. See? How could I speak out about what they did, even though it's true? She thinks, how could you do that, right? And I'm like, well, quite easily, quite easily actually, because what they did was incredibly wrong. They could have killed me. My mom actually did hurt me incredibly bad. My dad did too, like I said. But my mom was the one with the main physical abuse and emotional, psychological scarring. And my brother sexually abusing me completely changed my life forever. Not able to have children, you know, just the damage from the CSHL sexual abuse and what it caused me to feel all my life as a woman. Unbelievable, this stuff. No, I hold my abusers accountable, and they never did any time. They never had to pay the price or the consequences for what they did to me, giving me this lifetime of hell, really, to try to get through and get over. And the responsibility goes to them. They were responsible for that. I didn't do anything to cause that. And so that's why this is really important for survivors to remember it's not your fault. And you couldn't have done anything to stop the abuse. There's just no way. It's not your responsibility. It's the abuser's responsibility. They're the ones who need to take the blame, and they're the guilty party, right? So the self-help section for this is page 78 of the Survivor to Thriver. They said, number one, write in your journal the words you recall your parents or abusers using to place the burden of responsibility for the abuse on you. And what was the tone in their voices, the look in their eyes when they said those words? What reasons did you adopt to hold yourself responsible for the abuse? This is the thing. Well, many times children are told it's your fault that I'm doing this to you. My mom would tell me stuff like that. And especially my mom, because she just loved to really, put it on me that I was so bad that she had to treat me like that. And that's horrific, right? But that's the situation. And so when I did this journal originally, I had written all of that out, you know what I mean? And it was good because then I get to see that, hey, it wasn't my fault. It's just terrible what abusers do to children. It's not okay. It said, number two, imagine what you would say to your parents or abusers today about who is responsible. As you speak to them, what feelings do you notice within yourself? We could journal this stuff, so you write it down. What would I say to my abusers? And what feelings do you notice within yourself? Yeah, this is the thing. I went through and actually wrote those letters to my abusers, and like I was saying on a few shows ago or yesterday, and they, sat the chair there in front of me, an empty chair, and just imagine that they were sitting there, not all at the same time. I did them one on one. First, I told off my mom, then I told off my dad, and then I told off my brother, and I had these letters written to them, and I got to say everything I wanted to say to them, everything that I didn't get to say to them because they were passed away, and my dad, I mean, he did know how I felt about the situation, but I didn't want to hurt him like he hurt me. So I was related to my dad. He was like an elderly man when I saw him as an adult many years later, and I, instead of hurting him, I just told him the truth, and I handed him a copy of the book, A Life of Death and Redemption. I'm like, here you go, Dad. It's all in there. And, it's all true. You can read it. He didn't want to read it. And I did tell him, without telling him, because I didn't want to hurt him. That's elder abuse, right? So I didn't want to be an abuser like he was. I didn't want to be an abuser like my mom. I didn't want to be an abuser like my brother. I just wanted to be a good, kind person. So I was good to my dad, my abuser dad. I just got him to a place and then cut him off. I said, I'm not going to ever talk to you again, and I won't go to your funeral, and I'm not ever going to contact you again. I want zero contact. You're out of my life for good. But I told him, I said, I always loved you, and what you did was wrong, and what you did to all of us was wrong, to Mom, to all of my, all of my brothers and sisters, to me. And I said, you never even apologized for it. You never took responsibility for it. And I just want you to know, I'm not. I want zero contact. I'm not going to your funeral, just so you know. And I walked away from him at that point. I left him sitting on a bench at the seniors' place outside in the front in the grass in the summertime. And I walked away from him, and that's the last time I saw him. And he passed away. So it was the right thing to do. I didn't holler and scream at him and kick him. That's what he did to me as a tiny little girl, throwing me into walls. He hurt my back, he hurt my neck, smashed my head in the wall. That was just one time. That's not all of the abuse. That's just like one time. That man hurt me and all of his children and his wife. So, but I did the right thing because I didn't want to be like him. I wanted to be good. I'm like, no, I'm not going to hurt him. I'm just cutting him off. And I did. I cut all of my family off. But my mom had passed away when I was 30, so I couldn't resolve anything with her. And it would have never been resolved with her anyway. Same as my dad. Right? So, it's kind of, these things are so, so hard, right? They really are for people. If no matter what your situation is, you never deserve that. And, we deserve so much better. As children, we deserve love and care and kindness. And, for our needs to be met as best as possible, and not abuse, it's just horrific what we've been through. And that, we would hold ourselves guilty for that somehow, hold ourselves responsible for that. As children, there's no possible way we could have changed it. So that's why it's so important to recognize that it's the abusers who were responsible, whoever they were. And we just now have to learn how to get help, right? And number 3, sharing your story in ASCA meetings can work to expose myths about child abuse and can bring much needed validation for eventually seeing things the way they really are, or they really were. ASCA meetings are particularly effective in challenging these myths because most of the participants share the oppression born of this misplaced sense of responsibility. Many times, there's a lot of people that do hold themselves somehow partly responsible for the abuse, and a lot of times with the CSA sexual abuse that can happen because they were told, oh, many things survivors have been told because they were abused sexually. Well, you were a precocious child, or you were asking for it, or you wanted it. They've been, this is not okay. Children do not really. This is true. No children want to have sex with adults. They just don't. If they do, there's absolutely something wrong with them. It's not okay. Children are not ready for sex. Little children are not even capable of thinking about that. They might be interested in body parts because they have a body and they have parts. So whatever these body parts are, they might be quite interested in that. For a while they do because they start exploring their body. But the thing is that doesn't give the adult the right to go ahead and have sex with them. No. So, I was told some terrible stuff by my brother who sexually abused me for almost a year. And had I taken the guilt on from that, I could have easily thought that was my fault. But I was like, there's no way this is my fault, And I wasn't groomed. And that maybe is part of the issue. Because when children are groomed, set up to be, victimized and abused sexually by somebody, whether it's a family member or not, somebody who has access to that child, if they're groomed, then they quite often will take on the guilt. And there's no possible way you could have saved yourself from that. There's no way, So it's not our fault. It's not. And these things that they told us, or how they made us feel that it was our fault somehow, any of the abuse, doesn't matter what it is, it's just definitely not. So then I have to say, okay, it's not my fault. But then they left me with a whole lot of baggage, So I just need to get help with it. That's all. It's not my fault. And I need to reach out and get some help, or whatever, self-help, whatever you're doing. But it's just to realize that it wasn't your fault. Definitely not. Professional help section, page 79. They say, number 1, what is your therapist's response to the question of responsibility for the abuse? How do you feel about this response? Is it helpful or not? Tell him or her what you feel and discuss what you need from him or her in this regard. Number 2, some therapists encourage their clients to use the empty chair technique to talk back to their parents or abusers. That's what I was just talking about. This is probably where I saw it originally. And then I got John Bradshaw's books, and I think it's in there too. It says, after years of keeping your feelings and thoughts to yourself, this can be extremely empowering. However, this technique can also stir up old feelings of being disobedient and fears of being abused again. If the latter is your experience, explore what your resistance is to addressing your parents or abusers in this safe, controlled way. That's by pretending that the abuser, whoever it is sitting in that chair, envisioning this, and then telling them exactly what you want to say, whether it's written or just verbally or whatever. And like they said, sometimes this can make a person feel like they did when they were a child, that maybe they're being disobedient to that person who abused them, fears of being abused again. And that's bizarre, but that's actually kind of true, because that did happen to me a little bit, like, especially with the issue of, I thought, well, for instance, I'm not going to get into talking about Christianity here, so don't worry about it. All I'm mentioning is the fact that I thought, well, my mom's in heaven. I kind of think I do believe that. And because that's just what I believe. I don't think she's in hell. And I thought, well, if I go there, she's gonna beat me up. That was the sort of the thoughts that were in my mind when I was disclosing this abuse, writing my books and stuff. And the first thing that came to my mind was my mom's wrath for me going public with this stuff. Because she always told me she would kill me if I ever told anybody about the abuse. So, well, she did more than tell me. I mean, she would like beat me up, and she'd be telling me, screaming at me, you know what I mean, and beating me up physically, saying, if you ever tell anybody about what goes on in this home, I'll kill you. You know, it's like she was a violent, vicious woman. And so, I kind of always sort of kept that with me, right? But I still used to tell some people about the abuse. But the thing is when I went public with it, immediately my mind went to the fact that if I ever ran to my mother again somehow in another universe or in eternity or whatever, she's going to beat me up for sure. She's going to kill me. That was in the back of my mind for sure, because that was so ingrained in me from a childhood full of abusers telling me not to tell anybody about the abuse. So as soon as I started writing about it and talking about it publicly, I thought, man, that's terrible what they did to me. And that's what freed me, was telling people about the abuse. Because then I was like, wow, I'm no longer enslaved to keep that secret, right? It's like, no, it should never have happened. And shame on my parents. That's where the shame belongs. That's what I said. Like, I still have probably some shame I'm carrying around a little bit. I think it's mainly from the CSA child sexual abuse, but the shame from just being the overall abuse belongs to my parents and my brother. That's where the shame belongs. Shame on them for doing what they did. To me, just a child who wanted love and care. Like, so I'm saying, if you carrying this guilt and this shame, it wasn't your fault. And that shame and guilt actually belongs on the abuser, not on you. See? So this is where we have to get our minds to switch that around. Because quite often, we're thinking we're responsible. We take the shame on, we take the guilt on. There's no way. There's no possible way it could be yours. It belongs to the abuser, whoever the abuser was. Shame on them, and the guilt, they're the guilty party. So just keep that in mind. It's really important. Got to start changing the way that we feel about ourselves, right? And the way that we see ourselves in the situation. And the next step up is page 79, step 6. That's, I can respect my shame and anger as a consequence of my abuse, but shall try not to turn it against myself or others. I can respect my shame and anger. Sometimes they word stuff that just bothers me. It's like, I can respect my shame and anger, even though it doesn't, I'll still do the step. I don't just completely throw it away because I don't like something about it. But my shame, I can respect my shame and anger as a consequence of my abuse. I guess it's kind of like just saying, yeah, I mean, I respect the fact that what I went through caused me to be angry, and caused me to have shame and stuff like that. But I don't respect it at all, because it was a horrific situation. It never should have happened to me. Never should happen to any child. No child deserves to be abused. That's why I keep saying it. I'll always keep saying that. It's like, no, it's true, and the world needs to hear this, right? Because they're still abusing children. And, I can't respect anything about abuse and about what I took on from it. I understand it. I'm starting to really understand it. Like, especially the more years that roll by, the more I understand about why I reacted and felt the way that I did. But the thing is, I don't respect it. Like, I can respect it. I think that's odd, but I know what they're trying to say. But the issue is, it's just like so heinous. Um, that we would have been put through stuff that's so horrific that would cause us to feel shame and to feel these things, right? That's not okay. It's not all right. And it's just horrible. But yeah, but shall try not to turn it against myself or others, and that's just the issue. So they're talking about anger here, and shame, and that's step 6. And we've got about 10 minutes, so we can start this one. This is page 79. It says anger is a natural reaction to child abuse, and yet survivors have a hard time managing anger. They veer between lashing out or over controlling it, not knowing when it is appropriate and when it isn't. So, not knowing how to express themselves forcefully without overdoing it. You were no doubt angry as a child, but probably were not able to express the anger safely in your family. You may still be afraid of your anger because it may have been intricately connected to many of the bad things that hurt you. But bottling up your anger will also block your recovery because without ventilation, the anger may turn into aggressive behavior. And that's just true. Anger, that was such a huge part of my healing journey. That's why I did so much work on it. I think I did with this anger management. I don't know. I should see if that website's still there. It was called angerresources.com. It was Dave Decker and Mike Obsatz. That's what it was. I spent like, I don't know. I don't know how long I was on that website going through that information. Might have been like a year or two. Seriously. And I was doing work on my anger stuff. My anger, when I was a teenager, I took on kind of a tough attitude and allowed my anger to kind of go outward. Whereas when I became an adult and I thought, I want to be able to keep a job and I don't want to go to prison. I need to be able to keep a job and I don't want to go to jail. So I gotta control my anger and so I don't hurt somebody. So then what do? Is I've always was hurting myself anyway. But the issue is then it became an internal rage because I couldn't release it. I couldn't get rid of it. Never dealt with the abuse. So this is why anger is such a huge issue for adult survivors. Not everybody, you know what I mean? I mean, not everybody has anger issues, right? But some people do, and I was one of those people. So I was very angry. And it's like I needed to do something so that I didn't destroy myself, right? I didn't want to hurt somebody else. Like that's the issue. The biggest thing for me is that I just never wanted to hurt anybody ever because I just knew it just hurt so bad to have people hurt me. I'm like, why would I want to be an abuser? In my mind, I wasn't thinking abuser because I wasn't thinking of my parents as being abusers, even though they were brought up on child abuse charges. The issue is I was thinking to myself, I didn't want to be like them. I want to be like them. I want to be a good person. I want to be a good person to other people, not hurt people. And, that was always in my mind. So it's became this inward rage, right? Which was really difficult to get through, like I said, without, getting so, because I had this scream that needed to come out. And I thought if I actually go ahead and do that, I might cause myself to have like a stroke or something. Because I don't think my body can handle that, to be honest with you. I really don't. I don't think my body can handle that scream that needs to come out. Right? And so I actually did a video talking about that a while back. It was quite a few years ago now. But, it's just a scream that would be heard around the world. It would probably kill me to do it. So that's why I'm like, no, maybe that's not the way to go. So I try to do other things to let it out. Mainly writing poetry helps me because I can allow my inner wounded children to write these poems, and that helps get some of that anger out. Right? So it's kind of there's lots of techniques you can use, but I like that angerresources.com, and I don't even know if it's still there. It may not even be there anymore. That was a long time ago when I was looking at this stuff. It was like 2010, 2011. It was helpful, that's for sure. So they said, either veering between lashing out or over controlling it. lashing out, that's no good because then you can end up hurting somebody that, you know, that's just abuse. It's abusive type behavior. That's what my parents were doing, right? That's what abusers do. Lashing out and hurting people with our anger. That's no good. Or over controlling it, then that becomes, then that becomes that inner rage because, as a passive person, okay, or you can say, some people say, I never get angry, never. Actually, anger is an important part of our makeup as human beings, and if it's properly done, it's very healthy, right? Because certain things should cause us to be angry. For instance, people raping children, that causes me to be angry, right? And it should. It should. People killing people, anybody killing anybody, murder, outright murder, that should make us angry to know that that's going on. Child abuse, that should make us angry. That's a proper anger. It's not okay what's going on out there. People are killing children, killing babies, killing all sorts of youth and children, and they generally get away with it. Sometimes they get a few years, but they don't ever do much time. They get off for good behavior, come out and kill some other children, right? If they have some more, pop them out and kill them too, right? There's just, the studies are done. This is what's happening, and it's just not okay. That it's okay to be angry about stuff like that, and that. So anger, therefore, is very important. We need to be able to be have a healthy anger towards things, right? So if we over control it, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm at peace with everything. It's like you're at peace with the rapists out there and the child rapists, people in the sex trafficking industry. There's no peace in that. You know what I mean? I know victims of child sex trafficking, you know, who were trafficked, and this is not okay, right? So I'm saying you can't make peace with that stuff. There's no way. Can't you can't sit there and say, oh, it's all good, it's all okay, because it's not, right? And so the issue is I've got a healthy anger now, pretty much. I mean, I don't have that raging stuff in me because I worked through a lot of this stuff, right? But that scream that I originally wanted to do would have been too costly on my body, I think. But it needed to come out somehow. So I got busy. I started talking, writing poetry, working to stop and prevent child abuse helps that because a lot of my anger is then focused on where it should be. And so I'm always volunteering with groups that to promote and stop prevent child abuse. And that makes me feel good because it lets some of that anger go to in the right direction where it should go. So this is just it. It's not okay. Right? It said, as a child, we weren't able to express that anger safely in our family. If it was familial abuse, within the family, many times that's the case. Most children are not allowed to express any of their feelings if the abusers don't want that child to express feelings. They're not going to let them. Right? We were not allowed to have feelings. My mom was allowed to have feelings because that's the issue. Both my parents were allowed to have feelings about life and about what was going on in their life, but the children were not. So my mom could cry. She could cry all the time. She was actually quite often crying, sitting at the table crying, oh, crying the blues because her life sucked. And for sure it did. I totally agreed with her. But the thing is we weren't allowed to cry. It's like, okay, she could get mad and angry and like beat on us, wound us and burn me and do all sorts of horrible stuff to me. But I couldn't get angry. The minute I got angry, I got more abuse. See? So I wasn't allowed to get angry about anything. I just had to sit there and take it. So if my brother was beating on me, because quite often my brothers were a little too rough with me because I was just a little kid, tiny little kid. And they a lot of times were just joking around, but it was a little too much for me because I was so small and so wounded already. And so I'd get upset and I'd be kind of starting to cry or whatever. And my mom would then get upset and abuse me. See, she didn't want to hear my voice. Like she didn't want to hear me talking. She didn't want to hear me saying anything. She didn't want to hear me laughing, and she didn't want to hear me crying. My mother didn't want to hear me at all. And so because her nerves were. By the time I came around, um, she was fully blown mentally ill. You know what I mean? It's sad, but this is the issue. So no, I couldn't express my feelings. And when I got older, I used to actually. By the time I hit about 10, I started to just express what I was feeling, whether I got a beating or not, because I'm like, I don't care, you're going to beat me anyway, so I'm just going to say what I'm going to say. Right? And which did get me more beatings, right? More abuse. Right? So, but the thing is many times we're not, like they said, not safely allowed to express our feelings. So that's why those ASCA groups are really helpful. Because so many times we don't have friends who want to hear about the abuse. Sometimes, people don't want to hear about our stories because it's too hard on them, actually, is what it is. Because if they didn't come from abuse, they're just sitting around and it just blows their mind how somebody could do this to a child. Then they're uncomfortable and they don't want to hear our stories. So it's hard to find people that can actually sit and listen to you. And that's why having a therapist or counselor or a group support situation like ASCA or any group that supports abuse survivors is healthy. It's a good place to go. You can talk about what you need to talk about in a safe environment and share how you felt, how it made you feel. It helps you get it off your chest. And actually then what it does is it acknowledges that what you went through was so horrible and so hard on you and that it wasn't your fault. You deserved so much better. You know what I mean? But until you do that work, you're just harboring it. And that's what I was doing, right? Which was killing me. So that's why I'm glad I reached out. So, whatever you do, I guess we'll end the show here. We'll pick up the rest of this on Monday. So I appreciate y'all being here with me. Pasagio Olivelo, and Wanda, and Tessa, and other people. Thank you very much for being with me and spending this time. And whatever you do, take really good care of yourselves. And have a good weekend. I'll be on tomorrow for Survivor Weekend check-in at 12 noon Mountain Standard Time. And if you're, like I said, if you're having a day where you just don't think you can cope and you don't know how you're going to do it for 5 more minutes because you just can't breathe and it's all coming down and it's crashing and you can't figure out how you're going to do it, you need to call a crisis line. You really do. That's what I'm going to do. I'm serious. I made a promise to myself that I was going to never allow myself to be destroyed by my past, and that abuse was not my fault. I didn't deserve it. I don't deserve to go down in a horrible pit of destruction because of what somebody did to me so many years ago. That's ridiculous. I thought, no, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to get help, and I'm sticking it out. Like I said, every day I wake up, it's a slap in my abuser's face. All of my abusers. Yep. Every day I wake up, and I wake up and I'm like, I'm still here. I love myself. I love all my wounded selves. And I love that little girl that I used to be. It was just so cute, And I just hug her and I just hold her. 'Cause that's what she needed. She didn't need to be beaten and raped and tortured, spit on, thrown into walls and stuff. Like she's just so sweet. And I just love her, that little part of myself who was so wounded. And I'm learning how to take care of her inside. I'm learning how to take care of myself on the outside. And so I'm telling you, it's good. Every day I wake up, it's just a huge slap in all of my abuser's face. Right on. So you do the same. You stick it out. If you're struggling, like I said, you stick it out because tomorrow could be better. And you deserve so much better. And have a good day, everybody. Happy Friday. Take good care of yourselves. If you need resources, get a hold of me. You can contact me. Look at my About section. I've got my website there, my email, Facebook stuff. It's all over the place there. I always welcome people to get a hold of me. I have lots of people, survivors of abuse, as Facebook friends. Probably most of my friends are on Facebook are survivors of abuse. And so, reach out. If you don't want to reach out to me, reach out to somebody else. Right? Don't suffer on your own. Have a good day. Talk to you tomorrow.